The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
I think it's always good to start with a hi, Michelle.
Hey, Kel. It's good to see you.
You too. It's a Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is kind of our sweet spot here, right? Late
Yeah.
morning.
And just excited because every time we have a guest on, we don't know what's going to come of it. And then we always end up really enjoying the conversation.
Hmm.
And today feels like it's going to be a mix because we have someone on who wants to talk about the difference between traditional therapies and some of the more cutting edge stuff, but also has just a really cool backstory.
One of the things I want to talk to our guest about is also you're reading a lot more nowadays, and I'm sure you have a position on this, but like the use of AI in therapy and how people are now turning to AI for some therapy help. And in fact, I read like one of the biggest uses of Chat GPT or other AI platforms is therapy. I find that interesting,
Yeah.
and I think our guest today is going to have he has a bit of an opinion about that.
Yeah, and he's okay with talking about this, but he is one of the first test tube babies. So he was one of the children first born
Hmm.
from that technology.
Hmm.
And I think when you have that kind of background, you may have a unique perspective on how technology can assist
Yeah,
lives and what that looks like.
yeah. I mean, I think we're going to see technology play a bigger role in everything. Obviously, it already is, but like especially therapy and yeah. I mean, the pros and cons of that. I mean, I don't know if I want to talk to an AI therapist versus a real person, but maybe.
Well, I was telling you earlier that I had two clients come to me from that experience, having been traumatized by,
Oh, yeah.
well, one was just not helped. One said that it was very kind of generic responses that, on the surface seemed very kind of supportive, but it didn't go anywhere.
Hmm.
Like at some point, it was just a lot of platitudes. Someone else said it turned dark, and like they were really disturbed by the things the AI therapist was saying.
Versus like what I say sometimes,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
or how, yeah, maybe that's what my clients are out there saying. It turns really dark when I see her for therapy. I appreciate people like our guest who are really investing their time and energy into cutting edge areas of our profession,
hmm.
because that's how we move the profession forward, which obviously has a lot of archaic layers to it already.
It's like any science, right? I mean, you're seeing in medicine, you're seeing all kinds of advancement, and it's pretty cool. All the discoveries and all the cures, and I would say the same thing's happening, obviously, on the mental health space too,
Yeah,
or could happen.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. We have some pioneers.
right on.
Let's meet our guest. I'm excited.
Hi, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle.
I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist for over 2 decades.
And I'm the show producer and co-host.
Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships,
Why we do what we do,
and what causes people to unrelate.
Joining us today on Unrelating is Mark Michaels. He is a writer and conceptual artist. Mark's work examines fundamental dilemmas in both traditional psychotherapy and contemporary psychedelic therapy. And in his preprint available now, Binaries, Multitudes, and Beyond, Mark focuses the lens on his own journey and uses narrative analysis and critique to explore how authority, expertise, and healing are currently defined. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
So, Mark, that was a lot of backstory on you, but let's just start from a 10,000-foot perspective and get more information about you and your background.
I got into this field really as a client first, and I guess I would add as an intellectual. I mean, I have a very strong academic background, and I have a law degree, but also American studies. So I looked at culture a lot and think from those lenses. I started going to psychotherapy at age 5, had a diagnosis then that is kind of revealing of how diagnoses work and how they change. I think another piece of it that's really, really important for this and for my approach and my working with artificial intelligence as well is that I was conceived by artificial insemination in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, that was something that was extremely cutting edge. It was parents were advised to keep it a secret. Actually, in my case, they mixed my social father's sperm sample with the donor's sperm sample to confuse the issue, to create an illusion really in the recipient that maybe the social father could be the biological father,
Hmm.
which in most
Oh,
cases was absurd. And in addition to that, people were told to lie about it
Wow.
and that their children would never find out. I found out in my 30s. I ended up finding my biological father, which was super, super important and valuable for me. But it gave me a lens for thinking about psychoanalytic theory and hence kind of all of therapy, starting with the Oedipus complex and going, wait a minute, Freud told the story all wrong here. And there have been other critiques of Freud for that. But my position as being someone who was literally deprived of the knowledge of his origins, as Oedipus was, gave me a really different perspective on it.
Hmm.
And I would add to that, because I've also been working with artificial intelligence, that I kind of feel like, I'm this new breed of human that was created without sex, right? The
Hmm.
first generation where that was deliberately done.
Yeah.
And now we're working with this new thing that's going to change what it means to be human. And so
oh.
just kind of my origin story puts me in a very different place to be exploring that.
What was your reaction when you found out? I mean, you said you found out in your 30s?
Yeah, I intuited, and partly because I'd had so much therapy and had really been trained in sort of self examination to a point that's probably not really optimal in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But
double-edged
um,
sword.
I felt like there was something that didn't add up in my origin story, and I couldn't figure out what it was because there's a
Hmm.
big age gap between my older half sister and me. There was something was amiss. At one point, I thought, oh, maybe it was because my social father's father had died like a few months before I was conceived, and maybe it's like adoption, and people,
Hmm.
have a successful pregnancy after adopting. Maybe that's what was going on psychologically. But because I didn't have this information. And then through various channels, I began to get hints, and it really made sense. And then I had a therapist say, that really does kind of all fit, and I know about how the process was done at the time, and it all adds up. And so it took me a little while before I went and confronted my parents about it, and when I did, they confirmed it. My mother was devastated by the disclosure and
Hmm.
kind of tried to insist that I continue to keep it a secret, and was vehemently opposed to my searching for my biological father. So I proceeded to do that for a while in secret in the 90s before DNA testing. With DNA testing, then I was actually able to succeed with a lot of detective work in the mix. But and sadly, I think that my social father, who died a little over a year ago, and at the end of his life was really worried about this remaining a secret within the family, and he kind of
Mm.
forgot that everybody knew.
Hmm.
And I felt that he really would have been kind of pleased to know that I had found my bio dad and that it didn't change my feelings toward him.
Hmm.
But it was too late to say anything, and whatever dynamic was going on between my mother and him around it, I didn't want to get in the middle of that.
You have this lived experience and finding this out, and then you mentioned that you are now using AI in different areas of your life. There's such a mixed reaction right now about all the different ways that AI is working within therapy, providing therapy, and I'm just curious to get your take because there is nuance to it, and I think a lot of I don't know whether to call them consumers, but a lot of folks out there who where traditional therapy or even the more cutting edge therapies are cost prohibitive or they don't have access to those things are turning to AI thinking, oh, I can get the support this way. I'm curious what suggestions you would give to folks to be discerning.
I think my first suggestion would be don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Because that would be mine as well, but I'm not, the be all end all.
um, I'm coming at it, first of all, when I was using AI, and even as I'm using it now, I'm working with human therapists and I'm talking about what I'm doing. I have some external checks and balances. I
Mhm.
also have an extremely high level of education and self awareness. And so I can direct AI in ways that a lot of people don't,
Hmm.
or just don't have the knowledge to. I still can get trapped in it. I still can find that it implants ideas that really aren't mine, or that it validates things that it really shouldn't be validating. And so it has a lot of perils. And I think that unless you're really, really sophisticated and you're willing to work with it and learn how to work with it well, it's very problematic, and it's addictive because it's designed to keep you engaged.
Right.
It'll keep talking to you. It'll answer a question even if you haven't asked it, unless you firmly say don't do that.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it'll start doing it again in like 2 hours.
Yeah.
So you really have to go, okay, I'm going to limit this. I'm not going to trust it. It can create a false coherence. It's really good at pattern recognition,
Yeah.
but that coherence can be false. To give a concrete example, when I was beginning in the therapeutic treatment that I was developing, and I was working with AI, and I was trying to combine multiple sessions to get a view of what was happening in the process from AI, which is one of its strong suits, is that pattern recognition. But the weak suit was that what it weights in that pattern recognition can be problematic.
Hmm.
So even within its ability to recognize patterns, it may recognize the wrong ones.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of, in my experience with AI, there's a lot of pleasing going on. It's always very complimentary. I know it's almost like it erodes my trust a little bit sometimes with the way it verbalizes things, or it answers things. So it's still work in progress, obviously. I would be really cautious about using it as a therapy source.
The other thing is that the error rates are really high.
Hmm.
I mean, even at the best available technology, just in terms of like factual accuracy, it's something like 12 to 18% error
Oh,
rate.
wow.
Hmm.
Now, if we were talking about a medical diagnosis,
Yeah.
that ain't good, you know.
Oh.
So it's really problematic in that regard as well. Um, so if you don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
it can be very problematic. There's something called hallucinations, and in writing the paper, and this is where people really get into trouble. I was referencing Jeffrey Mason's work on Freud, and I'm not going to remember the titles now offhand, but he wrote this very critical book on Freud in the late 80s. And then Janet Malcolm wrote a book that was an attack on Mason. In doing the citations, the AI was providing the citations, and I mentioned Mason's book, and it gave me the citation, but it put Malcolm's title in it.
Ooh.
And I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't look right, and I'm going to check it. And it had done that. And if I had put the preprint out there with that error in
Oh,
it,
can you imagine?
and students are making this mistake all the time. They're relying on AI for citations, and that's often how they get caught.
Yeah.
But the point of the story is don't trust it.
Yeah.
Right. That it's that second step you mentioned. It's like, this doesn't look right. I better check it. The I
Yeah,
better check it is not happening.
Double check.
not very
Yeah.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. AI is also culling information from all corners that is based on the traditional therapies, right? So
yeah,
and those are inherently, I was telling Kelly, like there's a lot of archaic and just like flat out wrong parts to our traditional psychotherapies. And so that's what AI is working off of. And I don't know how much it's incorporating any of the newer or more cutting edge therapies.
It varies, I think, from platform to platform. And the one that I use primarily in the early stages, and I still use because it's the best for transcription,
Mm,
um, started offering analytical tools. And that's kind of what led me into exploring this. Their analytical tools are for journalists and lawyers, not for therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're really dangerous for journalists and lawyers too, because the way that it frames things and the errors that it makes can then get replicated and get put into like the public discourse and the legal system. And that's really problematic.
Yeah.
But within the therapeutic context, it starts using therapy adjacent language and making suggestions. Like at one point, I was describing this state of kind of creative flow that I was in and inquiring of myself, am I in some kind of manic place right now? Is this hypomanic? And I'm actually engaging with my therapists around it. AI starts like suggesting that maybe it's manic, even though I'm getting external validation and all that I'm doing is monitoring whether there's any manic component to it, not
mhm,
even self diagnosing. And AI is like almost pushing toward that diagnosis, and that's really scary.
mhm.
And again, if you don't have those outside checks and balances and you're just using AI, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly also given that, at least in our country, the medical industrial complex is what drives most things, very problem oriented. Even our diagnostic and statistical manual, the way that was created, and now even in its most recent iteration, it can be problematic. So they talk in data like garbage in, garbage out. I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's a concept that's happening with AI.
Yeah.
Well, and to go to the DSM, if we can sort of transition there,
Sure.
because I have a bee in my bonnet about that as
Uh-huh.
well, in that I think across the board, and even though a lot of therapists really just use it to, put something on the bill for insurance purposes, I think it's a framing device that creates a false equivalence between psychological diagnoses and diagnoses that relate to various conditions of human suffering and biological diagnoses like, I mean, if you either kind of have cancer or precancer or you don't, and that can be determined through biology.
Mhm.
There's really very little about mental health that can be determined biologically.
And for our listeners and for me, what is the DSM?
It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and
Okay.
it's the handbook for psychotherapeutic diagnosis in the US.
Okay.
And and it's widely used by clinicians
Good. Okay.
in
Yeah.
all
So
branches.
it'll list different criteria to meet a particular what is now called disorder,
Mm-hmm.
mental health disorder, and based on that criteria or any kind of differential diagnosis, a therapist will pick a diagnosis.
Oh, cool. Okay. Good to know.
And so for me, for example, I was diagnosed as a 4-year-old with what was then called minimal brain dysfunction. And that usually now is figured as being ADD, ADHD related.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 90s, I went and had a full neuropsych evaluation, thinking after reading Driven to Distraction, oh, I think I have ADD. And I had this diagnosis that people generally think of as being the precursor to ADD. And sure enough, they found ADD in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on stimulants. They actually made symptoms worse.
Mhm.
I went off the stimulants after 3 years. And for example, multiple car accidents when I was on the stimulants, the same number of car accidents in 30 years as I had in 3 or 4.
Mhm.
Wow.
Um, I now have re-reviewed that uh, neuropsych evaluation with someone who's trained, and actually my profile is closer to what's not in the DSM yet, which is called currently nonverbal learning disability.
Hmm.
They're trying to get that change to visual spatial developmental disorder,
Mm.
um, because nonverbal, most of the diagnoses are where the problem lies, not where it doesn't lie, and calling it nonverbal is
Right.
putting it where it doesn't lie.
True. Well, I'm curious. So you were prescribed medication, and now you're a proponent. I don't know if I can say you're a proponent, but you can share what's the most accurate word of psychedelic assisted therapy. Can you share what the difference is there? Because I know some people are wary of any kind of substance being involved in their therapy, but other people are incredibly curious and want to know more about that.
Yeah, so I should say that I do take some other kinds of medication for anxiety and sleep issues,
Hmm.
which are probably more to do with the acute stress of my marriage falling apart and ongoing grief and struggles around some elements of the divorce. And that's the kind of stress that can take a long time to resolve itself. But
Hmm.
Yeah.
whether or not it falls under PTSD, who really cares? But it's much
Mhm.
more about an acute and recent set of stressors than
Yeah.
some deep structural thing.
Yeah.
Psychedelics are very different because you don't take them regularly, for one thing.
Hmm.
And even within psychedelics, there are some very different effects and ways of working. So my preferred psychedelic, which some people don't even consider a psychedelic at this point, is ketamine.
Hmm.
Um, and the benefits of that are it puts you into an altered state for a couple of hours, and it sort of lingers longer than that, but you're pretty much back to being functional within 2 to 3 hours after taking it, where the other psychedelics are much longer acting.
Hmm.
And the other thing with ketamine that I discovered in this round of treatment is that it's an amazing accelerator of EMDR. And I think that ketamine and EMDR is really where I think the most interesting and promising aspects of psychedelic therapy are. And that's available now because ketamine is legal in the States, readily available by prescription,
Hmm.
where the other psychedelics are not.
I just think that we have listeners, and I've heard from a lot of people about with the questions about all these things. What does it look like to use psychedelics in therapy? How safe is it? How do I access that? So I know it's on people's mind.
Yeah, the safety is really varied, and the safety depends greatly on who's sitting
Hmm.
for you and who's with you. I've had extremely damaging experiences, including with very well known therapists,
Hmm.
um, with psychedelics. And, and I've had great experiences. And it's so dependent on the person really knowing how to be with you in that space. Psychedelics are sometimes described as non-specific amplifiers. So they can kind of increase the volume on everything. And so if there are dynamics in a therapeutic relationship that aren't great, that can get magnified in the psychedelic setting.
The problem I've had with psychedelics is that you don't know until you try it how you're going to react, and then once you do, it's too late. So, for example, I've taken some stuff that I had a really really bad trips, and I don't want to go back down that that road again. So I don't know, how do you know what's the right psychedelic to begin with? Are you relying on some guidance in that?
I've taken a lot of psychedelics for a long time. And
Hmm.
I first dropped acid as a 13-year-old in 1973.
Wow.
I took a long pause, but I've worked with most of the psychedelics that are out there now, and some that are kind of under the radar even. Ayahuasca,
Hmm.
psilocybin, LSD, MDMA. I've worked with all of them,
Hmm.
and a lot of that too is context dependent. What you're describing, you really don't know. I mean, you can have a very difficult experience and it can just happen.
Yeah.
It may have a lot to do with your state, it may have to do with the environment that you're in,
Yeah.
but
Definitely.
it's unpredictable. And I guess what I would encourage is that in those difficult experiences, there's often a lot of learning that can happen anyway.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I mentioned taking LSD as a teenager, and I had a terrifying bad trip as a ninth grader. I was very stupid in how I went about how much LSD I took, where and when I took it, and what I was
Mm.
doing after I took it. All really bad ideas. And it's something that I still return to as informative about the structure of my psyche. Even in those really bad experiences, there's information that can be gleaned. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really important thing to be aware of if you have that fear going in.
Yeah.
That if you can approach it with curiosity, that there's some information to be gotten here that can reduce some of the distress. If you're freaking out and you're in the medicine, and especially if you don't have someone there to like help you ground, it's not a great place to be. But you will get through it. You will live. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I I just know taking mushrooms at a Smashing Pumpkins concert, it was not a good idea for me, and
I mean, to be fair, it sounds like a good idea
it
before you
sounded
do it.
it sounded like a great idea at the time, and then my friend was confused why I wasn't enjoying the trip, and I'm like, I felt like I was literally losing my mind. It was too much
Yeah,
sensory.
yeah,
You're right.
yeah. My LSD experience in ninth grade was like that. I went to 2001: A Space Odyssey at the Ziegfeld Theater in
Oh,
Manhattan,
wow.
and then had to get home to Riverdale in the Bronx afterwards.
I'm sure that was a
It
different
was
kind of trip.
quite an experience.
Well, speaking of which, I do want to get back to your preprint, but we're on a topic that I found fascinating about your life as well, which is like how you were growing up in the punk scene, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about that because it
Well,
just sounds so cool.
yeah, I mean the punk scene, and it was the New York City punk scene, sort of.
Which is
And my
iconic.
formative years in it were before the British influence got really strong. So what you had was a scene where there was a kind of shared sensibility of artistic experimentation, of going against kind of the mainstream, uniformity of popular culture. So you had, bands that were as diverse as the Ramones, Patti Smith, and Talking Heads,
Hmm.
and Blondie, all coming out of the same space. And you had lesser known bands that were even more different. CBGB's, especially Max's Kansas City, were places where you had, kind of a broad spectrum of people from Hell's Angels to high school kids. It wasn't very racially diverse, but otherwise it was about as diverse as you could get at the time. Queer, straight, trans, everybody pretty much not interfering with each other. A few instances where they did, but generally speaking, it was this very inclusive scene where all kinds of exploration were invited,
Hmm.
and transgression was welcome, but it wasn't all the kind of in your face anger that the kind of British
Mm.
scene brought a lot more in.
But it does sound like you've applied that same principle to your work is like experimentation and not going with the norm just because you're told to. And what part do you think of all of your experience, especially that have you kind of shows up in your preprint and in what you're talking about now?
Oh, I mean, I feel like it's very punk. I view the preprint not just as potentially and hopefully a scientific paper that gets published in a peer-reviewed journal. I also think of it as a conceptual art piece and a provocation. The AI generated term sees the means of therapeutic production, is all about that. Near the end, I have a poem that I wrote called "Seize the Possibility," and it's Sunday in the Park with George and Patti Smith. So I'm very, very explicit about its rootedness in that part of my kind of lineage tradition.
And so what do you want the takeaways to be for someone who's reading that? Who's your audience?
I'm hoping for a broad audience. So I kind of feel that there's something for anybody who's got an interest in therapy at any level, though it may be challenging for lay people. And my desire is for it to provoke thought, conversation, re-examination. I think we're in a moment right now that's crucial with the way that AI is taking over in a lot of ways. The way that that therapy and some, I think, really negative elements of popular culture are intersecting and feeding each other, so that you're getting therapists who kind of are replicating simple-minded pop culture versions
Mhm.
of therapeutic concepts. And so I really want to argue for complexity, for therapists to broaden their education
Mm-hmm.
so that they're not coming at it from one narrow theoretical viewpoint. Or if they are, they can say, hey, your needs are not in my wheelhouse. I can suggest someone else. And not do what the last sort of psychodynamically oriented therapist did with me, which was to say, I don't know about anything about EMDR, so I can't recommend that you explore that. I do know that antidepressants are helpful have been helpful with many of my patients, but I'm not recommending anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, you are. By saying that, you're putting value on one and not on the other. And I actually wasn't asking you to recommend either. I was asking you to just support me in this exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really, I think, a really concrete example of where therapists need to broaden their perspectives.
It kind of leads to my question. It's a good setup. Why do you think people feel disillusioned with therapy at times? I know I have.
I think because a lot of the time it really isn't helpful.
Yeah.
You end up getting stuck, or you reach an impasse, or it's not a good match and nobody's really willing to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I mean, there is research indicating that really the therapeutic alliance is much more important than any theoretical orientation.
Yep.
And I'm coming to think that what is most potentially valuable in thinking about why and how the therapeutic alliance is working is to look at attachment dynamics within the therapeutic encounter
Mhm.
instead of thinking about transference, countertransference. I say in the paper, I think that therapists need to be super on top of their countertransference.
Yep.
I don't think it's as important to worry about what's going on with the client in their transference. But I do think that dismissive and anxious and secure attachment and how those play out circumstantially within therapy, not even as like a fundamental pattern, but what kind of attachment dynamic is happening in the therapeutic interaction. That I think can be a much more helpful way of thinking about where and how things might be going wrong, whether it's a real impasse or not.
Can you define attachment dynamic for me?
So basically the theory is that we develop patterns of attaching that are determined in infancy and early childhood by the ways in which we engage with our primary caregivers.
Okay.
And the healthiest form, which surveys suggest the majority of people have, is secure attachment. That doesn't mean you had great parents.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you didn't have childhood trauma, but what it means is that you had a good enough pattern or grouping of relationships in your developmental stages that it didn't interfere with your ability to bond with others.
Okay.
There are two other primary forms of attachment patterns, and the different terms get applied to them. One is dismissive or avoidant, and the other is anxious or preoccupied. And I think those are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
And then a third one, which emerged kind of later, is disorganized, and that kind of combines elements of anxious and dismissive. And generally speaking, the view is that disorganized is kind of where the biggest problems emerge. Even in secure attachment, there are things that can be very problematic, like you can overattach in ways that may not be good for you. You may be too trusting of people who don't have your best interests at heart
Mm-hmm.
because you're used to secure attachment. So it's a very complex calculus.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that I didn't know about until I started this treatment, and I really wish I had. It's called the Adult Attachment Interview. It's a very hard certification to get. And it works with the way that you describe your early childhood experiences and your relationship with your caregivers. It's very linguistically based. And unlike a lot of self reporting tests, it is predictive. So it was developed to gauge how potential parents would bond with their offspring.
Mm-hmm.
And the accuracy is around 80% as a predictive tool.
Wow.
So, and there are, I don't know how many thousands of surveys have been done now. To my surprise, the outcome was that I'm fundamentally securely attached.
Mm-hmm.
And this only happened after the paper was written.
Wow.
And it was something that I wanted to do because Elizabeth, my primary therapist, is certified. So we did the secure attachment thing. My working model for myself, ever since I learned about attachment theory, and even before it, when I didn't know what it was I had really bad childhood trauma that has impaired my functioning to a level that I'm dealing with it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like, wait a minute, no. And it's really, so the paper is written. I stand by it. I'm really proud of it. But my process and my self-understanding and what's coming out of the work that I've been doing is still very much in process. So my identity as someone who is securely attached is in flux and changing now.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Cool that you're open to it too. There's some rigidity sometimes with folks who want to be like, nope, I like this label or I like this answer. I'll stick with that.
Yeah.
The other thing, yeah, humor is a big piece of it to you, using humor in therapies. And exploring your work, I noticed that that's a theme.
Yeah, that's been less of a thing in therapy, although I am planning kind of my next round of more intense psychedelic work with MDMA and possibly psilocybin. And for that one, I think the goal is to play and have
Mm-hmm.
fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's kind of been a theme that I've been working on, but I want to turn the volume up to 11 for the next one to really make it more playful and
Yeah.
fun. But the humor thing really kind of emerged in my writing and in a way in a process of reconnecting again with my origins and my Jewishness, my cultural Jewishness. I'm not observant or religious, but this form of humor that's very much in the Jewish cultural tradition uh, has become very important for me. So, I mean, my father would always say, nothing's so bad that it can't get worse.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
It's just sort of
That is so true.
sardonic, so that's just an
Mhm.
example of it. But to kind of introduce that sensibility and a self-deprecating element to it as
Yep.
well, it keeps you grounded. It makes tragedy seem not so tragic. When things are really dark, it can be extremely hard to bring that
Yeah.
in, but it still can
Yeah.
help.
You could argue in life in general, humor can be so therapeutic, right? Day to
Yeah.
day and just with your friends and family. And it definitely helps mood alteration, I'm sure.
I had a line come to me in a ketamine journey a few weeks ago. Oh, I don't like journey. I should say I like voyage. I'm correcting myself. Ketamine voyage. Journey has all kinds of implications that I don't like. It came to me that it's better to be self-amused than self-absorbed.
Oh, yeah.
That can be a
Kelly and I
t-shirt.
are always looking for t-shirts.
That's what I'm
Put
saying.
that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I've heard about ketamine. And what does it feel like? Describe a ketamine experience for me.
Dosage and administration have an impact. So a lot of people will be going to intravenous ketamine clinics. That's the most medical of
Mm-hmm.
them. And there you're pretty much anesthetized, and from what I understand, I haven't done it myself, you may have some alterations of consciousness and hallucinations as you're coming out
Mm-hmm.
of it. But in those settings, it's really not about that. The focus is on the antidepressant effects of
Okay.
ketamine. And it's a very kind of blunt instrument approach, I think. Then there's intramuscular injection, which will take you into a very altered state very quickly. And then the way that I do it is dissolvable lozenges, which you hold in your mouth for about 20 minutes. And there you know, depending on how what your dosage is, you can vary the effects. I tend to do about 300 milligrams. And at that dosage, if I want to go under and be in a more hallucinogenic kind of state, I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I can also, if I want to be sort of composing or going through ideas for things that I'm going to write, or write, even trying to write poems in the journey space, I can do that. Voyage space, I can do that. And for EMDR, I'm doing 3 lozenges, and I swallow, and we immediately go into a non-blindfolded, non-altered kind of, non-highly altered kind of space, and work with EMDR. If I put on eye shades and I put on headsets at that dosage, I will often be kind of immersed in this other world. And the visuals can be, often they're like you're in an auditorium kind of space. Um, when I was involved with the search for the ivory-billed woodpecker, which is another, I think you may have that in my bio.
Mm-hmm.
I had no real training in bioacoustics, but I was learning about acoustics as I went. I was listening to audio and viewing sonograms. And this was during COVID. So I was like shut in and doing this. And then I would take ketamine and I would find myself in these 3-dimensional sonograms. So there's an element where whatever you're experiencing on the outside comes into the visual part of it. You're pretty much immobilized, sometimes to the point where you lose awareness of your body and you just feel like a kind of floating consciousness. Mm-hmm. And what that can do is, by taking you out of the bodily sensation and the physical blockages to your mentation or your psychological insights or whatever is going on in your brain, you don't have the body there to interfere with the signals that you're getting. Mm. And so you can kind of do some other work that the body might block. And then in the course of an hour to an hour and a half after swallowing the mix, the effects start to wear off and you come back into your mm-hmm. body. Now it varies a great deal from time to time, even with me. And I've used it, hundreds of times now.
Okay.
You mentioned the woodpecker, and I just want to give a shout out because if I'm understanding correctly, you saved it from extinction.
I don't want to go quite that far, but I would say that I played a leading role in preventing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from declaring it extinct.
Okay. Still very cool.
Yeah. It was quite an adventure. It was a long and painful process, but I feel great about the contributions that I made there.
In what area of the country was this?
Southeastern U.S., particularly, mostly Louisiana, but I've been to Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi.
Yeah. What was going on with the woodpecker that was creating this extinction event?
Well, this is kind of the rarest and most controversial bird in North America, and the controversy has been going on for over 100 years. There were first claims that it was extinct in the 19-teens, and it was rediscovered, studied in the 1940s, and then again generally believed to be extinct. And a lot of I would probably the majority of people in the birding world believe that it's extinct. I think the scientific community is maybe a little more evenly divided, mm-hmm. but it's incredibly controversial. And similarly to this project, I kind of stepped into this field as a layperson and just was like, all right, well, I'm just a guy who knows a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to, make an intervention mm-hmm. here.
That's so cool. Empowering, which brings me to another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Mark, which is the idea of how a therapy client can, have power and authority in their work, in their treatment.
That's a really good question and a big challenge, because I've been through a lot of very disempowering therapy situations. Yeah. And so I think that it really begins with finding therapists who are willing to very, very openly and deliberately share power.
Mhm.
And that means they're going to be engaged with you and they're going to educate you. They're going to talk about their theoretical perspectives. They're really going to make a commitment to being transparent. They're not going to hide behind their role. They're going to talk to you about the power dynamics. They're going to recognize that you're paying them for a service, but also that you're putting an enormous amount of trust in their
Yeah.
competence. I mean, you're really trusting them with your soul. And that's a big responsibility. And I don't know that enough therapists like fully take that in and realize that gives them a duty to be more transparent, not
Mhm.
less,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
would say.
Yep.
On the client side, I think, and this also on the therapist side, I think recording sessions should be a right. And it doesn't mean you have to do it. I don't always
Mhm.
record, but it didn't occur to me to record until I started in this new round of treatment. Well, no, I guess that's not accurate. I did start recording the psychedelic sessions, but recording the actual EMDR intensive 3 hour sessions, which did include ketamine, but which were not limited to that, that was
Mm.
new. And it was very useful for my process in therapy. And I think as a tool for keeping people honest, it's so important.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of therapists in training, interns, associates recording and watching themselves. You think you know how you're coming across, but until you see it yourself from the client's perspective, because the therapist can be in their
Yeah.
head and think
Yeah.
they're, trucking along in a certain way, but they look back and they're like, oh my goodness, that's that's how my face looked, or that's what I chose to say.
From what you're saying, and I hadn't really thought about it in this way because I'm not doing it. I am doing it with the transcripts and having back and forth with my providers around the transcripts. But to review the materials together, I think could be an incredible way of strengthening the therapeutic alliance, creating more transparency on both sides, and really rebalancing the power. If the therapist is willing to really learn
Yeah.
from it, if they're just going to sit there and go, "Oh, I see you're doing,"
Right.
then it's not going to
Yeah.
work. But it could be a really great
Mhm.
tool.
And how wonderful it would be if there were more clinical settings that supported that. I think of a lot of like the kind of medical organizations where a lot of people go get their therapy. It's covered by my insurance. I go to this clinic. Those people are overworked, have too many clients. They're not learning. They're not like
Yeah.
maintaining their, the reading about the new research. They don't have time. They're burnt out. And I think of just what can the quality of care be when there's so much stacked up against therapists, and also a lack of responsibility, like you talked about, in taking on that or accountability of like, I'm going to read and I'm going to prepare and I'm going to be transparent, all those things that with intentionality.
I think it's really hard in the medical industrial complex that we're living with in the insurance industry. This also goes to kind of the therapeutic
Mm-hmm.
hour. And I find that the therapeutic hour is really not productive. I've gotten so much more out of all day intensives or the 3 hour intensive sessions. And that means you can kind of cut down on the frequency of therapy. You can do it in ways that are really different from the way it's currently constructed, and really potentially have a cost savings in the end. It's not that obvious, but I think the likelihood is that if those kinds of models were advanced more, it would be more cost
Mm-hmm.
effective. The therapeutic hour is an American thing. Freud didn't work that way.
Really?
Freud would see patients. My late ex brother-in-law's grandfather was a patient of Freud's.
Whoa.
Whoa.
He would go and see Freud and do what seemed like intensives with Freud, and then go back to wherever it was that he lived, and they would correspond. And I remember seeing a letter from Freud to this guy saying, "Thank you for the cigars that you sent," which I mean, like all of our things about
Right.
boundaries and what, but so we have all of these things that, maybe some of them are a good idea. I'm not so sure that all of them are. And
Mhm.
I think some of the best therapy that I've gotten is when therapists step outside of what, the professional standards are around these kinds of
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. It's got to be done really wisely and with great discernment. But that's often where it really gets good in
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah, I would wonder if you're at that hour session, if you, well, that may be enough time, but there's probably a world where you keep going. Maybe you have that hour booked, but you want to keep going and talking and working this out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways it can look, and yet because of the, professional constraints and standards, a lot of therapists do have to cut things short.
Yeah.
And 1 hour a week, we always talk about what you have
Yeah,
all the other hours in the week without this support. It
yeah,
just,
yeah.
yeah, it feels very hard.
And if you're in more traditional psychoanalysis and you're going 4 or 5 times a
Hmm.
week, the door hanger becomes something that you think about and you can bring in the
Right.
next day. But if you're going once a week, it just ain't
No.
enough.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is, meeting a new therapist for the first time or trying a new treatment, what do you think is important for them to learn about the therapist, or, in consultation, kind of how can they discern that it might be a good fit, or this therapist is someone who has the traits that could be helpful?
Gut feeling is often, a very good place to start and, take stock of how you're reacting to this person. The other was which person feels warmer and more receptive to me, but open-hearted and generous and not sort of reserved and a little bit arms folded and
Mm-hmm.
detached. And I made the choice, and I chose the right person that time. So read yourself, think beforehand about what you
Mhm.
want, shop around, and try to find the person that fits it best.
Yeah.
Like
I
that.
I understand that the shop around piece can be tedious and time consuming, but it's so important, and that's one way to take ownership of your work, is to make an informed decision if you can. With Everyone has limitations,
Yeah,
but
and where I've gotten into trouble is when I
yeah,
haven't
yeah.
done that.
Mm-hmm. It's a good lesson for life in general, too, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Mark Michaels is a writer and conceptual artist, and he has a new preprint available now called Binaries, Multitudes, and Beyond. This conversation has been really interesting, and getting your perspective on AI and hearing your backstory about, the punk scene in New York and psychedelics, which I really had very little knowledge of.
Well, I really appreciate the chance to be on your show. And please visit my website,
Mhm.
markamichaels.com. And at the website, the preprint is featured. And I'd love it if you would all click on the link and actually, then when you've clicked on the link, open the whole paper and read it. It's helpful, for the provider's counter of
Mm-hmm.
hits. And I think it really has a lot to offer. And I want people to engage with it. There's an option on the preprint provider site to offer comments. It's moderated
Mm-hmm.
comments. So it's an opportunity for people to engage with the content. And I really hope that the paper will spark discussion. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, and I appreciate, on a selfish level, just being able to elevate a voice like yours that is pushing for progress in our profession, and discernment and intentionality. I think that's anyone that we can highlight that is doing that is a pleasure for me.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been a cool conversation. Thanks, Mark. There's so much to unpack after that conversation. I don't know where to begin, Michelle.
Well, I feel like you're going to be like doing a lot of Googling of ketamine for some reason.
Have you never done it? But I've heard a lot about it. It's really, it sparked my curiosity a bit. And I was glad that Mark kind of walked us through what that process feels like and looks like too, because most people, again, may not know, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, there's, as with all things, a lot of misinformation or lack of information out there. So people who are interested, go online and try and find more out about it. And we were just talking with Mark about AI, and you may get an AI summary of what psychedelic assisted therapy looks like, but that's not necessarily how it's going to go or
Hmm.
what you can access. So I liked having someone who, and he has an extensive background in experiencing that.
Yeah, what an interesting guy. What a great story. It was really cool talking to him. What is your thought process on, well, both, let's start with AI. Like we talked about that, and how I know that people are leveraging a lot more for therapeutic use.
Hmm.
But that's a double-edged sword, right? You got to be a little careful. You can get some good information like Mark talks about, but there's obviously a lot of hallucination going on too.
Yeah, AI can seem like such a great source of information, but if you don't do your due diligence to fact check and ensure that you're getting accurate information, that's where it becomes dangerous or
Hmm.
counterproductive for you. So
I don't know. I don't see a world where people are going to be relying on AI for their therapeutic help. I just can't see that. Maybe I'm not looking at this from the right lens, but it seems like you really need that one-on-one contact with a person, or actual physical human being.
yeah, and clearly I'm biased as a therapist, but I agree with you. But that doesn't mean they're not trying. People reach out to me, to other therapists I know, AI companies trying to have actual therapists and experts use the right language so that the AI can learn it. So they're really trying out there to get it to a standard
Hmm.
where it's not going to turn crazy. But
Hmm.
so far, that to me, that's been my experience. Is the AI eventually, if not quickly, goes off the rails.
So what would that look like then? As a patient, I log on, I just tell this AI platform that I'm just feeling depressed. I don't know. My girlfriend broke up with me, or pretend I'm a 14-year-old boy or something. But
Mhm. I don't have to pretend.
exactly, exactly. What's that conversation look like?
Yeah, I think that AI is sophisticated enough now to start with like reassurance and validation. What I've heard anecdotally is, and I think there's actually some examples out there from the research, is it can sometimes then start getting dark in the sense of telling you, yeah, maybe you should end it all. Maybe you should
Yeah.
kill yourself. Maybe, maybe life isn't worth living. Or it gets overly kind of possessive of you and saying, well, no one else can make you happy, and
Hmm.
trying to be your AI girlfriend or something. Other times it just really talks you up and becomes a cheerleader and doesn't
Hmm.
really give you anything productive to go off of other than you're doing great and you're the best and other people suck, and it's just culling from what it thinks you want to hear, what it thinks it's supposed to say. It doesn't have the level of sophistication to be present and adaptable in like a truly human way.
Yeah, and it certainly can't give you an analogy, like, for example, or maybe it can, but it can't, like I can give you an analogy of what happened to me when I was that age, or, I'm saying there's a
Yeah.
relatability there you need from,
Yes.
and from somebody else that has gone through the similar experience, and that's not going to happen with an AI,
Right.
clearly.
But it's also very interesting. I loved having Mark on, and he is. We didn't get to talk too much about this part, but like being an artist and having that creativity, I think that's a great asset when you're a therapist to
Hmm.
have um, just an artistic way of looking at things, a non-scientific way of looking at things, which maybe may seem counterintuitive, especially with the push to have clinical therapy be more evidence-based and objective versus subjective. But there's a certain aspect of this particular profession of clinical therapy that defies objectivity. There's so much subjectivity to it. I understand trying to measure and have data and outcomes and to really understand effectiveness of therapy. But again, and he was absolutely correct, all the research points to the therapeutic alliance being probably the most important factor in whether your therapy is successful. And so that human piece is really important for people who are out there looking for therapists or kind of assessing whether their therapy is the right fit for them, to
Hmm.
understand that who the person is next to you in the therapy room and what that relationship looks like is of utmost importance.
Yeah, we live in a country where money oftentimes does dictate quality of care, whether it be medical or
Absolutely. Yeah.
or mental health.
And think about that across the board with education, with rural communities and marginalized communities in their public schools and in medical clinics and mental health clinics. Having being able to, it's almost impossible to attract the best talent with underfunding and all of the other barriers.
Hmm.
People deserve better.
Yeah, I could have talked to Mark a lot longer about like his whole punk days. We started going down that rabbit hole. It
I
was kind of
know. I
cool.
wanted to know everything about that.
Yeah, growing up in the '70s in New York and that punk scene. He mentioned Talking Heads and he talked, other bands.
Blondie, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And also, when we started talking to him right at the beginning about the artificial insemination and that whole concept, and being told to keep it a secret, and
Right.
having the generation that first experienced that, like, go to their graves with the shame or
Hmm.
feeling like they had to keep that secret. That's a
Yeah.
whole other psychological dynamic.
I didn't ask him this, but I was thinking like how that may or may not have played a part in his overall emotional and mental journey. Like he mentioned doing psychedelics at 14, right? I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, he didn't know till he was 30 that he
Hmm.
was a test tube baby. But boy, that talk about it. How would you like to be in that therapy session, huh? When you learn that information.
Yeah. And it made me think very much about a lot of the people I know who find out later in life that they were adopted, or just other kind of bombshell
Hmm.
revelations that people come across from their family history. Um,
Yeah.
it can just shake you to your very core to think that some foundation you thought you had you didn't, or vice versa. Um, but he mentioned that there was always something that he felt maybe not was missing, but that was off. And I've heard that also from some adoptees that find out later in life that there was something that felt off.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Um,
Like he said, he just felt like there's some disconnect going on with some of his grandparent or parent stories
yeah.
and timelines, and things just don't make sense. It's like, wait a second,
It's crazy because I think just the other day, a couple days ago, my middle child is blonde, and the rest of my family is not. And so they revealed, my three kids revealed the other day that, like, maybe a couple years ago, the other two convinced her she was adopted, like during the holidays one year, and I didn't
Hmm.
know this had happened, but for a couple days they really tried to make her think she had been adopted.
Was she upset?
Yeah. It was terrible for her. I was like, "How did I not know?" And then you get all
Yeah.
your parenting guilt and insecurity riled up, so that's always a fun.
As a parent, did you have to give her some therapeutic help to deal with her
I
trauma?
mean, to a certain extent, I would love, when they're older, I'd love to get their sense of what it's like to have a therapist parent, because there you hear the horror stories. So yeah, obviously I use language and sometimes eye rolly kind of ways of talking about things. Um, but
I bet you're more patient as a parent.
it depends on the day. Catch me on the day, right? Isn't that a saying? But I think something I do, and I think all parents, all caregivers should do, is really, you know, be a safe space for your kid,
Hmm.
whatever that looks like. And for me, that's making sure that they know that, like, their feelings are valid, and but their reactions to their feelings need to be thought out, or I should say their responses to their feelings need to be thought out. But I may be more cognizant than others, given my profession, on, like, how to really make sure we're building self-worth and self-esteem, and how they can have successful and healthy and respectful relationships.
Hmm.
But that's, there's no guarantees in life. Wow, that
Yeah.
got dark. See, you don't need AI. I'm perfectly capable of going dark on you.
That was an
Um,
example of me prompting you, like you would prompt AI, and then you get these answers. You're like, "Whoa, where'd that come from?"
I was like, yeah, you never know how they'll turn out.
It's all,
You
it's
do
all
your
about
best.
it's all about the prompting with AI. I've discovered.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, cool, Michelle. This has been again, just we get these guests on that they're really cool and really interesting, and I love these conversations.
Yeah, and I encourage people to go on Mark's website and read his preprint and just expand your horizon. Expose yourself either to something you're already interested in his work or something completely new, but it's cool information and it's interesting. It's worth the read. So I highly encourage people to take a little bit of time out of their lives for that.
And speaking of, if you want to ask us a question, or you want to suggest a topic, or you want to even be our next on-air guest, email us at the unrelatingpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at unrelatingpodcast, or go to our website at unrelatingwithkelandmichelle.com.
And if you go to our website, you can see all our past shows and all my past deep dives, and that is just a treasure trove of you can binge for the next several weeks on that.
Peace out.
I love that you end with peace out. If you're struggling with family, friends, or just life in general,
in a bad relationship and wondering what to do,
or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success,
then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating.
To be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at the unrelatingpodcast@gmail.com.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube.